NCLUG Tech Talk with Bentley. And today's webinar is going to be on ProjectWise. But first, just some housekeeping details before we get started. The webinar is going to be a presentation, so we're going to mute all the attendees. But anytime during the webinar, you can submit your questions in the chat box. And if time allows, the presenter will address any questions they can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We will be recording this webinar, and we will share the link after the event on our website. NCLUG is offering PDH credits to those who have registered on the website for the event. And after this NCLUG session, we'll be sending out the PDH credits to those who attended the live meeting. And so now with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Sharon with Bentley, who's going to go over ProjectWise with us today. Thanks, David. Welcome.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Let me go ahead and I'll share my, I've got a dual monitor system here, so I'll share my second screen and put the slide up. So yeah, my name's Dave Sharon. I'm a senior application engineer with Bentley based in Toronto, Canada. I originally joined Bentley in 1997 and have been with Bentley for the majority of those years. I did have a couple of years stint with Aconex, which is now part of the Oracle team. So I'm actually going to talk today about ProjectWise 365, which is actually a relatively new offering at Bentley. So in the subject that I think you received in your email, this is what the subject is for today. So ProjectWise Cloud Services, ProjectWise Web, Deliverables Management, and Design Review. And then it goes on to say ProjectWise 365 is Bentley's instant on 100% cloud-based solution and focused on smaller and mid-sized firms. So I'm going to clarify that just a little bit. I expect some of you are already familiar with ProjectWise, and what ProjectWise probably means to you is you're either working with someone who actually owns and has procured ProjectWise design integration, and you may have used the ProjectWise Explorer, which is a client that you can install locally on your desktop, or you may have accessed it through a browser through ProjectWise Web. So what we introduced a couple of years ago now, and we've been continuing to develop these services, or what we call ProjectWise Cloud Services. So ProjectWise 365 is actually a subset of the functionality in ProjectWise Design Integration. So it does include deliverables management, which is focused largely on transmittals, submittals. It does include design review tools, both 2D and 3D. It includes a document section, which is very similar to ProjectWise Web, but ProjectWise Web specifically, just in terms of nomenclature, is really a window into ProjectWise Design Integration. So what that means is if you access ProjectWise via the ProjectWise Explorer before, where you see folders and subfolders, now you're doing the same thing with ProjectWise Web, but it's all through a browser. So it's kind of a window into the design integration. So with ProjectWise 365, we have introduced this area called documents that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. And then on top of that, we also include what we refer to as issues and design tasks. And I'll go through all this in detail. I'm going to use slides where I've taken screenshots for today's presentation, just because it will allow me to get through all the material in an hour, so it give you a high-level overview. If anyone wants to follow up with me at the end, I'll include my email, and we can go into more detail, or potentially in a future session as well. So in terms of ProjectWise 365, I've got the URL how that is accessed, but it's accessed at what we call the project level. So you create a project, and this would be your home page, or we sometimes call it the front door, which gives you access to these cloud services that I'm going to talk about. So initially, what you're looking at on the dashboard of your home page is really referring to tasks that are assigned to you around design reviews, design tasks, deliverables. But then over on the left-hand pane here, you can access each of these items individually. So things like documents, you can get into PDF markups, you can get into the transmittals and submittals, the 3D design review, and so on. So what I'll do is I'll take us through these. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat window. If it makes sense to stop and just answer the question, I'm happy to do that, and I'll let we'll just see how that goes. And I think Patty will be monitoring those questions for me if something comes up. So the first thing I'll talk about is documents. So documents we access by clicking on the documents icon within your ProjectWise 365 project. And when you do that, you're presented with a folder structure. So what's actually going on in the back end is a full ProjectWise design integration, but it's call it a limited template. So we deliver as part of ProjectWise 365 a template of 10 folders. Those folders can be renamed to whatever you like, but you're limited to those 10 folders. You can create as many subfolders as you like. So the idea is when a user goes in, they select on a folder. So for instance, I go into architectural, and then within there, I could see more subfolders and or documents that are contained within my architectural folder. So in this case, you can see I've got a bunch of PDF files. I've got some CAD files in there as well, but we really just support any document type, whether it be a Word document, a spreadsheet, a PowerPoint, a shapefile, a GIS data, whatever the case may be. In terms of capabilities that are offered at the document level for managing those documents, if I just select on a document and select the 3 dots there that give me more information, you can see I have the ability in here. I can open that document with the application that it's associated with through Windows. So if it's PDF, I could open up, for instance, with Adobe Reader. In addition, I can also check that document out. So if I open the document, I can open it, check it out at the same time. But what I'm just highlighting here is the ability for a user when they want to work on a document to check it out. And all that means is that I then lock that. Others can view it in read-only, but they won't be able to edit it while I've got it checked out. And that all goes to what we refer to as an audit trail, or the history. So I can see when someone's checked out a document if I go back and look at the history of that. So in this case, I've gone ahead and I've checked out that document, and I'm just showing here that others will be able to see who is the individual that has that document checked out if they're looking for that information. So with the project documents, all this can be synchronized locally through a reasonably new offering that we've called ProjectWise Drive. So this will actually eventually be available to existing ProjectWise design integration users very soon. In fact, in the coming weeks. But today it's been introduced as part of ProjectWise 365, and so you can think of it similar to the concept of OneDrive, where it allows you to sync documents from your ProjectWise 365 project down to your local computer, to your local workstation. So it'll recreate the folder structure from your cloud project and create that structure locally. And then similarly to OneDrive, as documents are accessed, they would get downloaded locally. So for instance, if I look at the icons here, the little cloud symbol would indicate that that document is still in the cloud project. I haven't accessed it, so I haven't downloaded a local copy to work on. Whereas the ones with the check mark, those have been synchronized with the cloud project, so I actually have a local working copy. So the idea is the first time I go and check out a document, I download it locally, and then you get the little check mark. And you'll see when a document is checked out in your local ProjectWise Drive as well, similarly to in the cloud with this check mark. And if you have multiple projects, in this example, I'm just showing one project, but you can see that folder structure beneath the project. So I can go into any of those folders, I can access those documents and work on them locally from my ProjectWise Drive. So let's go back now then to the documents section of our 365 project. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about a tool we refer to as PDF markup. So we could probably spend almost an entire hour talking about the details of PDF markup, but hopefully I can give you in a few minutes an overview of the capabilities here. So with our markup tool, it can be used just to go in and mark up, redline a PDF, but it can be used in the process of formal design reviews, as we'll see in a few minutes. And it can also be used within the context of deliverables. So meaning someone sends you a submittal and you want to mark it up, you can use our PDF markup tool as part of that submittal and transmittal process and have an entire review session along with notifications, and reporting capabilities. But the default behavior, if I go into any document and I just select on a PDF, the default behavior will be in ProjectWise 365 that it'll launch into our PDF markup tool. So I've created a screenshot here that is really trying to show all the capabilities, or a lot of them in one particular screenshot. And in fact, we continue to update this interface. So in fact, if you were to access it today, it looks slightly different than when I took this screenshot a couple of weeks ago. But just looking at the interface over on the left, these are what I refer to all as just navigation type tools. So the ability to window into an area, the ability to zoom in, zoom out, set a percentage on that window area. I also have different views of the data. So right now I'm in a folder view. And the nice thing about the folder view is that it allows me to go between various PDFs within my ProjectWise 365 project without having to go back to the documents window and then select another document from a folder. I would see all PDFs within that folder. But in addition, there's the ability here to view layers. So if I'm in a PDF, I can turn on and off layers, that might represent microstation levels or AutoCAD layers within the actual CAD file, the original CAD file. And then I've got the ability to view multiple pages and thumbnails and so on. Over on the right are all of the tools around marking up the file itself. So going from left to right, I've got measuring tools, and if I drop down that arrow, I can measure like by a perimeter, I can measure an area, I can measure from A to B on the drawing, and that would all be based on a scale that I define before I start measuring. So I have a scale tool where I can say, this drawing is 1 to 500, and use that for my measuring tools. And then next in line here, I've got a pen or a pencil tool where I drop the arrow on that. I can pick the color, the thickness. I can pick the transparency of lines that I'm placing, and then I can start drawing shapes on my markup. In addition, I've got a number of text type tools. So here, being able to highlight, underline text on the document. Continuing over to the right, I then have the ability to place numerous types of geometries. And again, at all of these, I can set the color, the thickness, the transparency, and so on. Going across, we then have the signature tool. So you can actually sign with your mouse, such as like what I've done down here. We also provide the ability to create your own signature and save that as a default. We give you also different fonts where you can replace the text within a predefined text box with your name, for instance, on a particular type of font. So there's a number of ways of creating a signature in there. And then we've got just placing a text tool. So I want to go and I want to place a note on this document. And then finally, we've got a call out tool and then also a stamping tool. So the stamping tool allows me, when I'm doing a red line on my PDF or as part of a design review, I can place a stamp like what you've seen here, which is a predefined either JPEG or PNG image file that I have on my local workstation, such as this one, where I just drag it on. But that could also, a stamp doesn't necessarily have to be a stamp like approved or revised. It could really be any symbol. So, maybe I'm in a P&ID drawing and I notice there's a valve missing. I could have a valve symbol in the form of a JPEG or an image file on my desktop, and I could drag it right onto the file as part of my markup to say, hey, you're missing a piece of equipment here, as an example. But we also provide a bunch of predefined stamps within the interface. A couple of things to note here about our markup tool is that it does provide real-time multi-user access. So similar to, say, something like Office Online, where two people can comment on a file at the same time, the same is true here with our markup tool. And what I'm showing over here on the right is that I'm logged in as two different users, David, who works for Bentley, and then I have this other Dave that works for a fictitious third-party company called Mainline. But the point is they can both be logged in, they both be marking up at the same time, and you'll actually see the other person's markup in real time. So as soon as they have finished that markup, it automatically gets saved to the PDF and it will appear on my markup if they're marking it up at the same time. And then over on the right, I've exposed the audit trail here that shows me everything that's gone on as part of that markup. So I can click on any one of these items, click on the cloud, and it will show me which markup that represents. Now, in addition to just doing markups, part of the PDF markup tool also allows me to do a design compare. So I can take any two versions. So I just go to my folder view when I'm in the markup tool in my ProjectWise 365 project. And for instance, here I'm currently in version C. What I can do is I can select on version A and just say compare. And what that's going to do is essentially a graphical overlay of the two versions of the document. So in this case, it's an architectural floor plan. The only change is that the door is swinging out in version C and swinging in version A. Now, in addition to all those markup capabilities, the ability to do design compare, we also have the ability for users to create what we refer to as issues. And so the big benefit of an issue over, say, just a red line or a regular markup is that it allows me to fill in a form that is reportable. And that form and the markup or issue can also be assigned to either a role on the project or an individual on the project, along with a due date. So the big benefit there is that, number one, they would get a notification. So I go in and I assign this, for instance, to Dave, who works for Mainline, and I put a due date on it. Dave's going to get a notification in his email, which is how he's registered for the project. And in that email, he'll be able to click on a link that will show him this form and also take him directly to the, in this case, the PDF that has the issue. So big benefits of issues within the context of PDF markup are really then come down to the reportability, the ability to track issues as they're assigned to individuals. So here I've gone in and I've displayed that report. And for those of you who may be moving to ProjectWise Design Integration, we've gone a little bit farther with this reporting, but I think we'll see it. Some of those changes come over to ProjectWise 365 as well, in that we've got a dashboard-based report based on Power BI technology that allows me, just to see a little bit more detail or insight into the issues. But at minimum here, even with ProjectWise 365, I can, for instance, see which issues are open or closed, and then I can filter based on that on those items. I can see the due dates. Shows me very clearly in red which ones are overdue, and then you've got hyperlinks, that take you to either the form if I hyperlink, if I click on the ID, or to the document over here if I click on the hyperlink for the PDF. And then again, just showing over here in the next screenshot, the ability, to turn on different information that's relevant around the documents themselves. So the PDF markup can also be used in the context of a formal design review. So in that first example, I just went into documents and I clicked on a PDF and that launched me in the PDF markup tool. But I could make a more formal process around that design review, and that I could create a new design review, fill out a form that is provided where I would link to a particular document in my document storage as part of that project. And again, I could assign that to an individual along with a due date. So just more formalizing the markup process. And then the idea is, I could go in, I could do my markup, I could click on send to review, and I could send that down the pipe, for instance, to another person within the project. Or alternatively, I could say, that's the end of the workflow, if you will. But in this case, I'm assigning it to Mark. Mark will then get a notification that he has a design review along with the link to the file to allow him to go in and mark that file up. So next thing I'm going to talk about within ProjectWise 365 project is deliverables management. So deliverables management, as the title suggests, is really focused on deliverables. So meaning either submittal of documents coming into my organization or me wanting to send out a bunch of documents in the form of a transmittal to an external organization. Submittals and transmittals could also be done internally. They could be departmental transmittals or submittals. It doesn't have to be with an external party. We have lots of folks who also use it internal to their project. In addition, it also allows me to manage requests for information. So whereas today, I think a lot of folks manage RFIs maybe through a spreadsheet, or maybe they even just do it through email, this allows me to have RFIs in a central location in my cloud project where I can report on them. I've got an audit trail. I can see what's due when, which questions have been answered, and so on. Also part of managing deliverables is the ability, when I send a transmittal, to manage a cover letter template. So we provide a template in the form of an Excel spreadsheet that you can modify. You can have as many templates as you want within that project. So if there's different organizations you're sending transmittals to, it allows you to manage, for instance, things like what do I want to appear in that cover letter, who it's going to, what are the due dates, when are the documents, and so on. But in general, the deliverables management tool set allows me to really reduce risk because I'm able to monitor, track, and report on the communications around both RFIs as well as submittals and transmittals. But in addition, it also allows me to create and manage really any formal project correspondence. So an RFI is a good example of something that people might want to manage, but you can create your own form within deliverables management around project correspondence that you want to track as part of the project and report on, which of course can always be important when you get into litigation about who said what when. So what does it look like to the actual deliverables process? I've got an example here. First, I'll show this just in the form of a workflow that we find to be a typical workflow, and it's certainly not the only workflow, but one that I'll show you in how it works in the tool. But first, we can look at what we think is probably representative for a lot of organizations. In this case, this would be, so I'm Dave, I work for Bentley. I have an external vendor who's going to send me a submittal of documents. So these are incoming documents coming to my organization. So what I would typically do in most scenarios is I would bundle those up and I'd provide that to what might be a formal doc controller. A lot of companies obviously don't have someone who's dedicated to being a doc controller. It could just be, Joe who handles the external documents, or a project manager or something of that, along those lines. But the idea is then those would then be submitted to the client. So in this case, I'm receiving those documents. I'm the client, I'm Bentley. I get those documents, and maybe I'm the project manager, not exactly a doc controller, but then I send that to maybe a discipline lead. So maybe these are civil documents or they're architectural documents. And then that lead reviewer could then distribute them to his or her team. So the idea here is I can have multiple reviewers reviewing those simultaneously. What we typically find is in the context of transmittals and submittals, folks are not sending the native documents, but they certainly could. That's fully supported. If it's PDFs that they are sending, published formats, then again, this is where the PDF markup tool that I've already spoken to in a little bit of detail comes into play. You can have multiple reviewers who are using our PDF markup tool at the same time to review those. They send those back to the lead reviewer, who then consolidates those and then passes those back to the vendor. And so those consolidated markups, of course, would include any comments, changes that are proposed. So the vendor can review those again within the PDF markup tool. And you'll see this in a moment in some screenshots. But then they would go make changes to those original designs, using whatever tool they're using, Revit or MicroStation or Civil 3D, whatever the case may be. They would update that set of PDFs and then send them back. And then again, that process just continues and is repeated potentially, multiple times. So what does that look like in the context of the tool? I'll go back to my slides here. So I'm working for Mainline now, and I want to send that submittal to Dave at Bentley. So how would I do that within ProjectWise 365? I would within my project, I'd go and I'd say I want to create a new transmittal. When I do that, I'm presented with a simple tab-based form. Basic information required is indicated by an asterisk. But so these are drawings for Bentley. I can have different purposes, and the purposes would define whether I'm expecting comments, for instance, or not. So if I'm wanting Bentley to review these, then I'm going to expect comments back, and I'm going to have a due date where I'm looking for those comments to come back. I would then pick whoever I want to send this to at Bentley. So this could be a role in the project. So maybe it's not Dave Sheeran or Teresa. Maybe it's role of project manager or lead engineer or lead reviewer, or whatever the case may be. Depends on how I've set that up for my project in ProjectWise 365. And then if in the case of reviewing, I can have, different things. I want them to acknowledge it. I want them to respond, for instance, and I can include some comments. And then the last required thing I'd need to add there is the documents as part of that submittal. So I could upload a zip package, which allows me to include a document attribute template where I want to, when those documents get imported into my project through the transmittal, it automatically will fill in certain attributes that then would be searchable and reportable. Or alternatively, I can say I want to add files individually. So if I click on the add files, then it will take me to the documents section of my project, which again, we talked about that in the opening slides. So I would go in, I would pick those documents from within my project. And again, we're not limited to PDFs. It could be any document. It could be the original design documents of Revit, DWG, DGN, spreadsheets, whatever the case may be. But we do find a lot of folks more use published PDFs in this case that are able to be marked up rather than changed. So I would select those files. And then optionally, I could just go ahead and issue that. Alternatively, I could just modify the predefined scheduling that I've already set up for my project. So in my template for sending a submittal, I've defined that in general, I want a response within 2 weeks, and I'm looking for them to at least acknowledge receipt of that submittal within 2 days. And then just things around reminders and so on. And that will come in the form of a notification, in this case, to the Bentley person that's receiving this submittal. So when I click on the issue button, I can preview the cover letter. So you remember I talked about that template we provide. This is what, if I'm viewing the cover letter, this is an example of a modified template. So we provide the template with all this information, but you can put your own company logo in here. You can turn on or off different pieces of information. So do I want to see the recipients? Do I want to see the documents and so on as part of that transmittal? And then, different attributes, what's the due dates on it and so on. So then to the person sending that submittal, this is what it would appear to once they've sent it. So then they realize they've got a report basically that is, they can filter based on different types of transmittals. They can look for ones that are just overdue, ones that have been acknowledged and so on. There's a fair bit of reporting around this as well. But in general, they then have a record that was sent. So then what happens for myself at Bentley? I get a notification in my email that I have been sent a submittal of documents, and you can see there's, you know, the information around that submittal. I can either click on the hyperlink down below to open the project, or I can just click on Open in Portal. So from that notification, I click on Open in Portal, and before I can actually review the incoming submittal of documents, I need to first acknowledge it. And when I do acknowledge it, that sends a notification back to the original submitter that says David Sheeran has acknowledged that submittal. And so he's seen it in this case, and you've got a record of that as well in your history for that submittal you sent. Once I do acknowledge it, I've got a couple of options. I can either download those documents locally to my workstation, and I can review them with my own tools, or I can start responding right inside my browser. So if I click on Start Responding, then that will allow me then to take me right to the response tab. In this case, there's 2 PDFs that were sent to me, and I can review those using that PDF markup tool right inside my browser. So I never have to exit. I don't have to jump out of ProjectWise 365 project. I'm doing all this right within that same browser. So I click on Review Document, and then when I do that, I have the ability then to use those numerous markup tools that we already talked about. So I can go in, I can use my pencil, I can place shapes, I can add a signature to it. And as well, we can have multiple users that are responding at the same time. So, you know, I may be logged in as Dave, but as Teresa is adding her comments, I'm also seeing what she's adding to the document. And if I select or click on the name of any one of these comments over here in the call it the audit trail, it will, you know, basically draw me, select, if you will, that markup, so I know who marked up what and when they did that, add those comments. So then I would click Send Response, or in my case, Teresa had sent her response, and then that goes back to mainline. So this is what it would look like for the third party that had provided that original submittal of documents as part of the project. So I can see it says, you know, Teresa responded, one document was rejected, one was approved. And then Dave has not fully responded yet to the transmittal. But I can then click on Open in Portal, and I would get a quick report that would tell me, for instance, what's happened with those 2 documents. So in this case, I can see the individuals that have responded, and then down below, I can actually see the response. So approved with comments by Dave Sheeran, and then also approved with comments in this case by Teresa. And then if I want to see their response, again, I don't have to go into another tool. Right within my browser, right from that hyperlink, I can say view the response, and then I can see their changes. So their responses are locked. As you can see the little lock symbol up here that indicates those are locked. I can't actually change those. Those are the comments that came back from Bentley in this case. But it allows me, again, to be able to see who commented what as part of their review of that incoming submittal. And then all of this can be reported on as part of the project by clicking on the Project Insights. So Project Insights is a Microsoft Power BI based reporting. You don't have to create this report. We essentially provide this template out of the box, but give you the ability to configure things like the fields you want to report on. You know, things like, do I want to be able to filter by status over here on the right? I can choose what those are, or I can filter based on recipient organizations. So the report itself is provided with a number of tabs around, you know, incoming submittals, outgoing transmittals, submittal trends, and so on. So it gives me the ability to get really good insight into the management of those submittals and transmittals. So last topic on my agenda that I wanted to talk about is 3D design review. So we've talked about the 2D design review tools as part of the PDF markup. So the 3D design review tools are currently in technology preview. So that means they're not fully released yet as part of a ProjectWise 365 project. They're there, you can use them. It's just that they may change as we continue to develop them. Now, that said, with the 3D design review tools, they do support MicroStation files, AutoCAD, Revit, and IFC. And the idea is it gives web users who aren't necessarily CAD users, they don't necessarily have to be designers or engineers or technical folks, but they are people that want to be able to view the model, comment on the model, potentially mark up on the model, and collaborate on the model. So the way it works is if I want to create a new 3D design review, I would go over here and I'd say, okay, I want to create a new design review. When I do that, I have the ability then to browse to the documents in the documents section of my project. And so in this case, if I browse to a DGN, as I'm doing here, then it's going to ask me when I browse to that DGN, okay, is that just a plain old MicroStation file, or is that one that's being created through, for instance, Bentley Open Roads or Power Geopack, or is it something that's been created with Open Buildings as an example? So what we have built in the back end as part of our, some of you may have heard of our digital twins or iTwins technology, and that's what this is all based upon. We essentially have these various bridges that allow ProjectWise to go in and generate a web-based view on the fly of that model that then you can edit and mark up, not edit rather, but mark up and review upon within a browser. So we've got different bridges that really what that means is they take all the non-graphical data as well. So as part of that design, obviously you have graphics, but Open Roads adds information differently than Open Building, than does Civil 3D, than does Revit, for instance. So this is a way of telling it, what data do you want to pull out of there? Similarly, if I were to click on a DWG file, it's going to say, is that just a plain DWG, or did it come from Civil 3D, or maybe from Aviva or Autoplant, as an example? And the benefit there is that it's going to extract all that non-graphical data as well as the graphical data when it generates that model. And then it'll generate that model on the fly and then allow you to then view that right inside your browser. And then there's numerous tools you can see over on the left. These are tools that allow me to do things like measuring and sectioning and selecting. And then I've got, windowing type tools, zoom in, zoom out. And the idea is I can go in and say, I want to create a new comment. So I create a comment, and that's what these indicators are. And in this case, this is a model of downtown Toronto here, where I've clicked on the roof of the building and that generates a new comment. And then when I create a comment, what it does is it creates a saved view in my browser that others can access. So if I were to click on either of these saved views, I click on the view, and then that then allows me to go in and generate a markup. So the idea is it's really kind of like a snapshot at this point. I was in the 3D model, but then it gives me a snapshot of that saved view and allows me then to basically create comments as if I were in a 2D view. So as if I'm, flatten this now, and I'm going in and I'm adding, a cloud, I'm adding some text, for instance, and those all go against those comments. And then they can have statuses. So, this is open, it's closed, it's under review, and really allows that collaboration. But again, for, call it non-designers, non-engineers, and folks that don't necessarily know how to use CAD or MicroStation or any of those design tools. So with that, that is what I wanted to cover today. I'll be happy now to open it up to questions either in the chat window And in fact, I will paste this just in the chat for anyone who's interested. This gives you a little more detail on what is ProjectWise 365, and if you're interested in doing a trial, you can go there. But at the same time, I've also provided a bunch. We have a bunch of YouTube videos that go into more detail on the various tools within ProjectWise 365, and I'll just put that in the chat window as well. So do we have any questions? I'm just seeing in the chat. Looks not seeing any here right now. Alternatively, you can just use a microphone and ask any questions you may have.
Yeah, folks can unmute themselves if they'd like to ask a question.
Maybe people could just raise their hands if you're using ProjectWise today. And by ProjectWise, you're probably maybe familiar with ProjectWise design integration. Are there folks out there that, so I see some hands. Oh, great. So we've got a bunch of existing users. And so you can type in the chat, but how many of those are using, maybe, I'll pose the question this way, ProjectWise design integration? So meaning you're probably using a ProjectWise Explorer to access documents.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a few. Okay, so we got, looks like, well, 6 anyway. So everything I've talked about today for those folks that are using ProjectWise design integration is actually available to you as a cloud service. It just may not have been adopted yet. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're hosted by Bentley. You could be running this on premise as well. So any ProjectWise design integration can have all these capabilities on premise, even though they're just working through a browser. But the ability to use deliverables management. In your case, you would be using ProjectWise Web as opposed to the document section I talked about. So you would have access to all of your folders and subfolders within ProjectWise if you were to enable these cloud services. So extra cost, should I use both? And really, I'm a technical guy, Dean. I'm not a commercial guy, but in general, to anyone who's, let's call it, on ProjectWise Connect Edition. So if you're on the later versions, then as far as I know, there's no cost to the extra cloud services. There may be costs to implementing them if you want Bentley to help you set them up and configure them, but they're generally speaking available to you. You just need to set them up. If you're Bentley hosted, then that becomes very straightforward because we basically just have to turn it on for you on our side. And that's kind of one of the advantages of being Bentley hosted. But if you want to send me an email, Dean, I can find out who your account manager is and let you know specifically whether, what might apply to you. And I guess actually your second question was, should I use both? And you certainly could. I don't know all the details of our commercial offerings, but I know we have something called E365, which does give users the access to both ProjectWise 365 and ProjectWise design integration. But do feel free to send me an email and I'll point you to the right person. And a comment from Jennifer, reviewers should use the web. It's cheaper. Design integration is more expensive license than the web interface. And that's absolutely correct. We do have a lot of folks who are looking just to use the web interface. There are certain capabilities that they might want to use full ProjectWise design integration. And a key one there is in the title, design integration. So one of the things that ProjectWise design integration provides is the integration with the design applications. So meaning with MicroStation, with AutoCAD, Civil 3D, with Revit, with Open Roads. And what that means is that, for instance, if I go to check out a file, it knows about any associated reference files. Also, if I want to go, for instance, I'm inside MicroStation and I want to open a cell library, that integration allows me to go and pick a cell from a cell library that's managed and stored within ProjectWise. So there are definitely some capabilities that the web does not provide, but it is very functional for sure for what I call non-designers. So anyone who's wanting to access any other project-related information, they can do what they need through the ProjectWise web connection. Any other questions from anyone? Comments?
Well, David, I appreciate you taking the time and going through this. Looks like definitely something we could all be using and trying to put into our routine. So it'll be interesting, I guess, to see where all this goes in the next couple of years. I guess more and more people use it and
yeah, for sure,
comfortable using it.
Yeah, if there's subtopics in there in future that you want myself or one of my colleagues to provide more detail as part of the user group, feel free to reach out. Be happy to do that. And then, yeah, if anyone has any questions, I just put my email in the. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. Happy to try and answer questions as they come about. And thanks for the time today, Patty, and everyone who's joined.
Yeah, appreciate that. Just as a follow-up, I guess, thanks everybody for joining us today. We will be sending out PDH credit receipts within the next couple of weeks for attending today's event. And then if you have any comments or suggestions, please just go to our email is at events@nclug.com. We'd be interested in hearing any feedback that you have to give us. I think currently, I don't know that we have anything officially on the books again, but we're trying to get something going for the next couple of weeks. I mean, we're looking at continuing these tech talks. It's just they might be a little more sporadic than every week. And we might even be looking at changing the day of the week. So it might not always be on a Wednesday going forward. So just keep that in mind and just be on the lookout for the next event. Thank y'all for attending.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoy.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.